Hey all, thank you so much for joining me on this presentation. My name is Jae Wilson. I'm the lead data strategist and BI developer at Onyx Reporting. And I wanted to talk to you guys today about ensuring and reporting on a data validation and a framework for creating that in your data warehouse automation tool of choice. This topic is important because one of the reasons why I think a lot of organizations transition away from using Excel, for example, as your automation or as for your reporting is because you say, you know, there's so many opportunities to have errors within Excel, and we want to make sure that we're enforcing specific rules, business rules, in the way that we report on our data. Alternatively, when you are talking about your ERP and what goes on inside of NAV or AX or GP, you might say, you know, theoretically, every transaction should have a salesperson on it so that we know who to give the commission to. But in real life, our data, you know, it's not perfect. So a data validation framework in your data warehouse can help you keep track of these issues, and ideally report on these issues so that you can, you know, fix them in your source data. So here is an example of the data validation framework that exists in your data warehouse automation tool. And you can see here the reporting is very basic. You have a record number, and then you have the error number. Now, of course, if we're looking at that and say, okay, I need to go back and fix something, that's marginally useful at best. So what we're going to get to, or what I'm going to show you how, I'm going to show you this workflow that I've built that gives you a little bit more information. So you can see we still have the record number, we still have the error number, but we can also see the table that it comes in, and the reason why this record failed validation, and also the severity of the error, whether it was just a warning or an error, and we'll talk about the implications of that. Okay, so let's pause for a moment and consider some data constraints. There's a couple data constraints, but I think these two are the more popular ones or the most common ones. There's the idea of a primary key, and there's an idea of the data validation rule. So the primary key tells you, how do I uniquely identify a record? Customer is a really easy example. We would never use the customer name as the primary key because, you know, you can have multiple John Smiths in your database. We would probably use some sort of a business key, you know, the customer number, the customer ID in your database to uniquely identify a record. And then when it comes to data validation rules, I already gave the example of, you know, maybe the salesperson code cannot be blank. In this case, we're seeing what it looks like when you have a data validation rule that says the sales amount cannot equal 0. So again, two different ways of handling key constraints or data constraints. One says this is how you uniquely identify a record or a dimension, and the other one says here are rules about what the data should look like. And the data validation rules will tend to be business rules. Okay, how does that all apply in a data warehouse automation table structure? How does it actually get executed? If you were to go into your data warehouse and really look at the tables in the data warehouse, you would see for every table, say for the vendor table, you would have at least 4, possibly more tables. And you can see in our screenshot here, we've got LMR, and then down here, we've got our V and T tables. So the top set are physical tables and the bottom set are views of the raw table. All right, so what all does that mean? Okay, so the raw table is going to have all of your data with no data constraints applied before all of the transformation takes place. So you could think of it as it's literally a straight copy of the data out of your ERP system. If you're looking in the data warehouse, the raw table will contain this data straight out of the staging database, again, before data constraints have been applied. Then in the transform tables, you'll see the raw data post-transformation. And in the data warehouse, usually we discourage people from doing transformations in the data warehouse, but you'll still see T tables if you have done, say, recasting of data types. So the data started as a varchar 50, and I changed it to a varchar 10 to match the dimension key or something along those lines, right? Transform tables, you shouldn't see too many of those in the data warehouse, again, because you usually don't do transformations in the data warehouse. The log table records the data that did not pass the validity constraints. So if you remember the very first picture that we talked about that had the record number and the error number, that's the log table. And I guess what's challenging about the way it's implemented in data warehouse automation is every table has a log table. So theoretically, you should check every log table to see if there are errors in it. And when you have 30 or 40 log tables, that can become cumbersome to manage. And again, that's why we're going to take a look at this workflow I'm talking about, where we have one table that keeps track of all the errors from all the tables. The M table is, kind of your Rosetta Stone. It translates an error number into a meaning. So I think in the earlier screenshot we saw that error number 1 means that you have a violation of a primary key constraint, whereas error number 2 means that you had a record where the sales amount was equal to 0, and maybe error number 3 means that salesperson code was left blank. Yeah, the M table is the Rosetta Stone for translating what an error means. And in other words, you have to have the log and the message table in order to interpret, for a record, what was wrong with it. Then the V table, the valid table, that's the table that has all the records that pass your validity constraints. And that's the table that we always report on. That's the table that we use to feed our cubes, but it's really important, again, to make sure that there's nothing in our log tables, or if there are errors in our log table, that we go back and fix the data in our ERP. This little last bullet is kind of a side note. Valid tables can be represented as physical copies of the raw table, only with valid records, or the valid table can be a view that's basically the raw table with a select statement on top of it, just to make sure that we keep out the error records. Anyway, that's a side note, not terribly important until you start looking at really, really large data sets. Okay, moving on. So what is the workflow that I'm proposing? So in the proof of concept that I'm going to go over with you, you're going to see that I've created a script, or I've created a block of code that says for each log table, right? You've got 40 log tables. For each log table, insert all of the errors from that log table into a new table, which I'm calling error table. And you can see it right here. We're going to put all of the data into the error table. But what we're going to do a little bit differently is, in addition to having the error number and the record number, we're also going to include the text that describes the error, the severity, and the table name, because of course we could have errors from 5 or 6 or 20 tables. If I wanted this to actually be something that I sent back to the report analyst to say you have to go back and fix this record, I might choose to include, say, the primary key of the table or the entry number or some additional information so that they know where to go in nav or GP or AX or whatever to fix the problem. Okay, that's a proof of concept, basically a really long SQL script. To integrate it into your data warehouse automation tool, we're going to break it up into a couple steps. So obviously we have to create the error table in the application. Then we need to add a custom script action. Basically that block of SQL code will put it into the application. And then we're going to make sure that we trigger that script as a pre-step before we do data cleansing on the error table. So basically, all of the magic is in this insert script, and we just have to tell the application, hey, run the script to deposit all of the data into this error table. And then every day you'll use either Jet Professional or some sort of SSRS report to actually report against that table and see if there's anything in your error table. And if there is, then obviously we've got work to do, and if it's empty, then smooth sailing. Okay, so in a separate video, I'm actually going to walk through that the code that I used to generate this workflow. But again, the whole point of this was to ensure reporting and data validity. And again, we're talking about this transition from having a log table, having many log tables that we need to check that don't have the descriptive information that we need to do something useful, to a report, a single report that has all of the errors, all of the problems that we can go fix in one fell swoop. All right, thanks so much for taking a look at this presentation, and I hope to see you in the next tutorial video that actually shows you how to implement this. Cheers.